And I'm going to be taking you through this Certified Production and Inventory Analyst course. This program consists of 5 modules, each of which is broken down into smaller portions. We're going to start with Module 1, which is the Introduction to Manufacturing and Operations Management. This is going to be broken down into the formation of businesses and what is a business strategy. We're going to look at various functions of a business and the kind of activities that take place in a business. We'll look at the management of these businesses in its different forms. And of course, supply chains are becoming more and more important within the world today. And any business is part of a supply chain, and customer service within that business is utterly important. Module 2, we're going to focus on operations planning and scheduling. And we're going to start off with probably the most important part of this subject, which is forecasting and demand management. Any business needs to have a reasonable idea of what the demand is going to be on the business, such that we can organize the supply. We'll then move into planning and scheduling and materials planning and capacity planning, which really need to be done together, because you can't have a pile of materials and no capacity to convert it. And on the other hand, we don't want capacity sitting around with nothing to do. And so we need to plan materials and capacity together. Module 3 is about materials management. And if you think about it, materials are your business, and the flow of those materials through your business is very important. So the procurement and purchasing process is very important. The warehousing of those parts within your organization is also pretty critical. We need to know exactly what we have and where it is in real time. The second part of this module is on inventory management, and there are a number of different techniques that we can use to manage our inventory and our materials handling. And of course, transportation. Once we have finished products, they need to be transported and they need to be distributed down the supply chain so the ultimate customer can get their hands on them. When it comes to Module 4, we're going to be talking about manufacturing and manufacturing processes and how technology is changing the way we manufacture product. We have different manufacturing strategies. We may be make to stock if we're making fast-moving consumer goods, or we might be making to order if we're making maybe printed cardboard cartons for our clients and we just make them to order, or we might be working in an engineer to order business where we're making tooling perhaps for injection molding machines, where we have absolutely nothing to start with and we need to design the product, we need to buy the raw materials, we need to manufacture and deliver the product. There's also assemble to order, which is a bit like a car assembly plant. And then we'll talk about the various manufacturing processes that we might find within our business and the materials that we might find in a manufacturing environment. Last module, Module 5, is about manufacturing and operations support function. And there we have industrial engineering. These are the people that are designing our products and making them easy for us to manufacture. And of course, we need to be looking at productivity, very important productivity. And of course, quality, inspection, metrology, also very important. We need to be able to make a product right the first time. And of course, maintenance of our equipment is incredibly important, because we need to know that our equipment is always available for use. The third part of this module is about lean and waste management. And the last is about continuous improvement. So it's about doing things better tomorrow than we did them today, and looking for the waste in our processes and getting rid of that. Okay, so let's start with Module 1, which is the Introduction to Manufacturing and Operations Management. We're going to start with Module 1.1, which is about business formation and business strategy, looking at the primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors of business. The primary sector is where we gather the raw materials we need. The secondary sector is putting them together in products that we can sell. And the tertiary sector can include a lot of other businesses that are not really in manufacturing, but are more in the service area of our lives. We'll look at different company structures and the formation of companies. Now, this can vary slightly in different countries around the world, but we'll be looking at a few of the basics here. We'll also look at unincorporated and incorporated businesses and what the difference is between those two. We'll look at business strategy. It's very important. If you have a business, you need to understand what the strategy is out into the future. Otherwise, you're not going to have any goals to work towards. And then we'll look at formal organizational structures. And there are a number of these, and depending on what type of business we are, we'll probably use one of these formal structures in our business. But we also have informal organizations as well, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The learning outcomes, the objectives a business would establish for its operations. The functions of the primary sector is secondary sector is tertiary sector. We need to distinguish between unincorporated businesses and incorporated business, the advantages of an incorporated business and an unincorporated business. And there are advantages and there are disadvantages, of course. Purpose of a vision statement and a mission statement within your business, and distinguish between these two statements. We need to distinguish between formal business structures and also informal business structures. The conceptual framework in this module, businesses, and they're often referred to as organizations. An organization is a body that is set up to meet a number of specific needs. There were three basic business sectors: the primary sector, which is gathering the basic raw materials that we require in business; the secondary sector, which is the manufacturing, putting the product together; and the tertiary sector is about getting distribution to the final customer and other activities like insurance, healthcare, etc. Companies generally fall into two broad sectors. We have the public sector companies and the private sector companies. We have incorporated businesses and unincorporated businesses, and they both have their advantages and disadvantages. A business strategy articulates the overall direction of the business, and a business requires both a vision statement and a mission statement and a clear set of goals and objectives. A successful business needs to build a formal organizational structure through which it is able to achieve its objectives. Module 1.2, business functions and activities: accounting, engineering, finance, human resource management, inspection, maintenance, and marketing. We will continue the session looking at materials management, a little bit on physical distribution, on production itself, production planning and control, quality management, sales, research and development. A lot of these subjects we will go into a lot more detail during the course itself. So the learning outcomes for this session are going to be the business functions in a typical manufacturing organization. We need to distinguish between finance accounting, cost accounting, and management accounting. The three branches of engineering, the role of the human resource management, types of inspection, and also the types of maintenance that we might find in our organization. The role of materials management, production, and distribution in providing good customer service. In the role of marketing and sales, and distinguish between the two of them. The conceptual framework in this module. Every type of business, manufacturing, or service requires a number of support functions to support its core business activities. There are 14 support functions for almost any reasonably sized manufacturing business. Support functions include accounting, engineering, finance, human resource management, inspection, maintenance, and marketing. And in addition, support functions include materials management, physical distribution, production planning and control, quality management, sales, and research and development. Support functions permit or facilitate production of goods and services intended for further processes or entry into the marketplace. Manufacturing cooperates closely with the associate business support functions during its daily operation, and the goal of every business entity is to simultaneously minimize operating costs and maximize customer service. Third module, 1.3, management. We'll look at the different various management functions. We'll talk about the organization and authority within that organization. We'll talk a little bit about job design. We'll talk about leaders and leadership. And then we'll talk about controlling in a business and management responsibilities. And so what are the learning outcomes for this particular module? Management and leadership. And we want to distinguish between these two things. There is a difference between management and leadership. The role of management in a typical manufacturing environment. We need to distinguish between line of authority, functional authority, and staff authority. In the four functions of management, the process of job design, the leadership styles, and distinguishing between them, in management's responsibility to its user group. The conceptual framework in this module. The term management encompasses a host of different functions undertaken to successfully accomplish a task. Management is the processing of information and making decisions. Managers have authority, responsibility, and may delegate and have accountability. Management functions include the planning, organization, leading, and controlling. And planning consists of defining goals for future organizational performance and then deciding on the tasks and resources to be used to achieve these goals. Organizing is the framework in which a company defines how tasks are divided and resources deployed. There are three types of authority present in almost every kind of business undertaking, and that's functional authority, line authority, and that's staff authority. Job design, which is the process of combining various elements to form a job, keeping in mind organizational and individual worker requirements, as well as consideration of safety, health, and ergonomics. Leadership, which is ultimately about creating a way for people to contribute to making something extraordinary happen. Four distinct leadership styles: dictator, autocratic, democratic, and free reign. Control establishes standards of accountability, measures the working process, interprets results, and takes corrective action. And lastly, the management of an organization has responsibilities to its customers, its employees, the general public, and of course the business owners or shareholders. Fourth part of the first module, looking outside the organization and looking at supply chains and customer service, levels of planning activity, elements of a supply chain management flows, customers and customer service, which is very important, isn't it? Measures of customer service, and then what are our order winners in our business and what qualifies us to be in that business. So the learning outcomes for this section differentiate between a supply chain and what we call a value chain. Supply chain and supply chain management, how material flows through the supply chain. We need to distinguish between the roles of strategy, tactic, and operational planning in the supply chain. Each element of the supply chain, customer service, and the importance of customers to the business. We need to distinguish between order qualifiers and order winners in attracting and keeping those customers. Why it's important to measure customer satisfaction and customer service levels. The conceptual framework in this module. Supply chain is an integral part of a business, from procurement all the way through to distribution and the end customer. A supply chain starts and ends with the customer and is only as strong as its weakest link. A supply chain is a systematic approach to manage the seamless flow of information, materials and services, from raw material suppliers to manufacturers to warehousing and the ultimate end customer. Supply chain management aims to streamline a business supply side operations to maximize customer value and gain a competitive advantage in the marketplace. A supply chain has three levels of planning: strategic, tactical, and operational. And the elements of a supply chain include product development, customer buy-in, production planning, purchasing, inventory control, production, logistics, and transportation. In the supply chain, products flow from supplier to customer. Demand flows from customer to supplier, but information flows in both directions. A company is only in business because it has customers, and a company has both internal and external customers. And customer service is the provision of a service to a customer before, during, and after a purchase. Customer service is all about keeping the customers happy and ensuring they are not lost to the business. A customer service level is an agreed figure between a customer and a supplier on the level of service to be provided and maintained. Measures of customer service include the effectiveness of communication channels, length of the order cycle, and levels of goods availability. Customer service represents the place component of the marketing mix. Module 2.1, Forecasting and Demand Management. We're going to talk about what is a forecast and why do we forecast, and how might we use that forecast in making decisions within the business. We'll have a look at some different forecasting techniques. We'll look at some time series demand pattern, and then very importantly, we need to look at measures of forecast accuracy. There's not much point in making a forecast if we don't know the accuracy of that forecast. But we're going to start by looking at the difference between dependent and independent demand, because in one case we're going to forecast the demand and in the other case we're going to be calculating it. So what are the outcomes for this particular module? Well, we need to distinguish between the difference between independent demand inventory and dependent demand inventory. What forecasting is and why is it necessary to forecast in the business? The role of forecasting in the decision-making process and the planning and scheduling of an organization. We need to distinguish between causal forecasting, qualitative forecasting, and quantitative forecasting. Time series demand pattern, the methods of tracking forecast error, and the importance of tracking that forecast error as well. The conceptual framework in this module. Independent demand items we need to forecast. Dependent demand items we're going to calculate. Remember, a forecast is an estimate of the future demand for the goods and services of a company. Forecasting product families in the shorter term provides us with a more realistic or a more accurate forecast. Forecasting assists in our decision-making process. If we don't have a reasonable idea of the future, how can we make those decisions that will affect our future? Forecasting techniques comprise causal, quantitative, and qualitative forecasting techniques. And there are a range of demand forecasting patterns we see. When we look at forecasts, we can see there is maybe horizontal, trend, or seasonal or cyclical patterns that are developing. And really forecasting is all about identifying those patterns and then projecting them into the future. Methods to track forecast error include things like bias, and remember we should get bias out of our forecasts as soon as possible. Then we have mean absolute deviation, we have standard deviations, and we have those tracking signals. So forecast accuracy must be carefully monitored to improve the usefulness of our forecasts. Module 2.2, planning and scheduling. We'll talk about planning and the horizons for planning. We'll talk about the three different levels of planning: long range, medium range, and short range planning. We'll also talk about manufacturing and distribution inventories, as well as scheduling, master scheduling, rough cut capacity planning, known as RCCP. So the learning outcomes for this module are going to be distinguish between long range, medium range, and short range planning, production planning strategy. We need to distinguish between planning and scheduling. A number of scheduling tools, the master scheduling process, the differences in master scheduling for each product positioning strategy, and lastly, to a role of rough cut capacity planning in the master scheduling process. The conceptual framework in this module. Planning is the work a manager does to determine a course of action. Planning must precede all other management activities. Long-range planning activities are the responsibility of top management, and long-range plans usually extend out 3 to 5 years or more into the future. Medium-range plans are the responsibility of the operations management team, and these plans extend possibly out 12 to 18 months into the future. Short-range planning is the responsibility of the operations executive team, and it deals with the day-to-day activities of the business. Production plans are constructed differently depending on the product positioning strategies being employed. Remember, we have make to stock, make order, assemble to order, etc. Plan answers the question what, and a schedule answers the question when. Scheduling is the activity of assigning times at which particular tasks will be executed or events will happen. The goal of master scheduling is to develop an achievable schedule that will meet the customer service objectives and do so with the least inventory, lowest manufacturing cost, and the maximum revenue, which is the throughput or the machine hours. Capacity planning, which establishes the availability of the critical resources needed to effectively execute the master production schedule. Module 2.3, materials planning. We're going to talk about materials requirement planning and the inputs to the materials requirements planning process. We're going to be looking at the MRP, or materials requirements planning record, and materials requirements planning output. And then we'll look at performance measures for materials planning. The learning outcomes in this module. The purpose of materials planning in a manufacturing environment, components of the materials planning process as well. Various bills of materials formats. We need to be able to construct a bill of materials for a simple product of your choice, MRP record and label, then distinguish between action messages and exception messages, which are the outputs from the MRP process. The materials planning performance measures. The conceptual framework in this module. Materials requirements planning is a computerized ordering and scheduling system for manufacturing and fabrication industries. Material planning is used to establish the demand for dependent demand items required for a build program. Material planning determines what to order, when to order, how much to order, and when it is needed. The inputs to the materials planning include the master production schedule, the bills of materials, inventory data, open order status, and planning data. And at the heart of the materials planning is the MRP record. And the outputs from the materials planning process includes a schedule of planned purchase and manufacturing order releases. We also get action messages and exception messages as well. And lastly, several performance measures need to be established to measure the effectiveness of the materials planning process. Module 2.4, capacity planning. We'll then be talking about the capacity planning process and the different measures of capacity. One of the most important things when it comes to capacity planning are the routings and the lead times and the shop calendars, which we'll discuss. We'll discuss the capacity planning processor, the outputs from the capacity planning process, and then we'll talk about input and output control, which is on the factory floor, and then finish up with rework, scrap and waste, and how does this affect capacity planning, and then some performance measurements for capacity planning. So with regards to the learning outcomes for this module, we want to give the purpose of capacity planning in a manufacturing environment. Pair priority planning and control with capacity planning and control. The capacity planning process and how capacity planning is used to balance load with capacity at a work center level. We need to distinguish between theoretical capacity, rated capacity, and demonstrated capacity. Manufacturing lead times, an explanation of each of the elements of the manufacturing lead time, of which there are a few. Capacity is a rate of doing work, and then the process of input-output control. The conceptual framework in this module. Capacity planning, establishing the availability of capacity at the work center level. Capacity measures the ability of a work center or work cell to accomplish a certain amount of work in a given time period. There are three measures of capacity. We had theoretical capacity, demonstrated capacity, and rated capacity. Manufacturing lead time is the time that elapsed when a job first enters the manufacturing facility up until the time when the work is complete and it's put into the finished goods store. Capacity is a rate at which work can be completed. Load and capacity need to be compared with each other using the same units of measure. And then we had input-output control, which helps us to stabilize the quantity of work in process at a particular work center or in a department. And then last concept of rework, scrap, and waste, and how these detract from available capacity. Module 3 is about materials management, and we'll start with Module 1, 3.1, which is about purchasing and warehousing. The contents of this module will have a brief introduction into materials planning, and then we'll talk about purchasing, goods receiving, and warehousing. So the learning outcomes for this particular module are the role of materials management in the supply chain, materials planning process, the role of purchasing in the supply chain. Unique factors to be taken into consideration when selecting a supplier, the goods receiving process, the role of warehousing in the supply chain, and distinguish between a contract, private, and a public warehouse. The conceptual framework in this module. Materials management is the business function responsible for coordinating the planning, sourcing, buying, movement, storing, and controlling materials in an optimum manner. The prerequisite for implementing all materials planning procedures is that inventory management must function correctly, work in conjunction with other business functions, and always be up to date. The goal of purchasing is to obtain the right materials in the right quantities with the right delivery and the right quality from the right source and at the right price. Supplier partnering requires building a good working relationship with open communication channels between both parties. Regular contact allows dealing with any problems before they escalate. It provides opportunities to work together more effectively. Goods receiving is the starting point for all warehousing activities. The role of goods receiving is to receive incoming goods, not to warehouse them. Each step of processing incoming goods should be executed both quickly and effectively. Warehouses perform a vital role in the supply chain in ensuring goods are adequately protected and made available at the time they are requested. Warehousing is the receiving, storing, holding, and handling of goods in a warehouse. There are three classes of warehouse: contract warehouses, public warehouses, and then the private warehouse. And there are a number of different types of manufacturing warehouses. At times there is a need for a number of special categories of warehouse to meet the producers and distribution needs. Looking at module 3.2, which is all about inventory management and materials handling. Then we'll talk about inventory management and keeping track of inventory accuracy. We'll talk a little bit about ABC classification of inventory, and then materials handling, some storage equipment, and then identification and control equipment. Learning outcomes are concerned in the role of inventory in the supply chain, distinguish between the types of inventory and the functions of inventory, and then compare cycle counting with periodic stock takes, the number of inventory cost categories, and how the ABC classification principle can be utilized in planning for and controlling inventory. Materials handling, and give categories of the materials handling equipment, different types of storage equipment. The conceptual framework in this module: inventory and its classification as raw materials, parts, work in process, finished goods, and distribution stock. The class being determined by where the inventory is positioned in the material flow cycle. Type of physical characteristics of inventory, and the functions best describe the purpose of which the inventory is used. The material flow cycle describes the movement of materials to, through, and from productive processes in warehouses and storage, and in the receiving and shipping. Inventory has a cost, and the cost of inventory includes the cost of the item itself, plus all the costs associated with purchasing and holding that item in inventory. Methods of keeping track of inventory, including the control method, the cycle counting method, and the periodic stock take. The ABC classification of inventory, sometimes called Pareto analysis or the 80-20 rule, which is based on ranking that suggests that it might be possible to divide inventory into these three distinct ABC classes. Materials handling is the efficient short distance movement of goods that usually takes place within the confines of a building, such as a plant or a warehouse, or between buildings and a transportation agency. Module 3.3, transportation and distribution. And we'll talk about transport and transportation. Packaging forms a pretty important part of transportation. It protects the products as they go through the supply chain. Then we'll look at packaging waste, and then third-party logistics and fourth-party logistics, and then some other transportation agencies, and finish up with some distribution network. The learning outcomes in this module: physical supply and physical distribution. Activities of distribution management, we need to distinguish between for-hire carriers and not-for-hire carriers. Modules of transport, the role of packaging in the supply chain, and distinguish between the services offered by a third-party logistics provider and a fourth-party logistics provider. Characteristic of the alternative distribution network. The conceptual framework in this module. Transportation is an essential ingredient in the economic development of any geographical region, and transportation brings together the raw materials and parts for the production of marketable goods. It then makes the necessary provision for the distribution of these goods to the market. Two types of carriers: for hire and not for hire. Protective packaging is used for the containment, protection, handling, delivery, and presentation of goods, and the activities of placing and securing goods in those materials. There are three classes of packaging: non-returnable, charged on receipt, and to be charged packaging. Packaging waste is a substance or object which the holder disposes of, or at some point will dispose of in the future. Companies may outsource their logistics function to carriers, 3PLs and 4PLs, and then physical distribution is an integral part of the business logistics, involving all those activities relating to the physical movement of goods from the factory to the end consumer. Module 4, which is about manufacturing and manufacturing process, and in particular module 4.1, which is about manufacturing and technology. Some major groups of knowledge. We'll talk about technology. We'll talk about elements of technology system and types of technology systems, and then about the product life cycle and extension strategies for the product life cycle. The learning outcomes for this particular module are major groups of knowledge transformation processes. Just the importance of effective feedback in maintaining stability in manufacturing, and then distinguish between societal goals and system goals. The product life cycle curve, the importance of dovetailing each product positioning strategy with each phase of the product life cycle. The conceptual framework in this module. Manufacturing uses natural elements to produce man-made product. Customers will only buy and pay for what they perceive as being value for money. The four knowledge areas are science, technology, the humanities, and the descriptive studies. The technology system takes an input, changes it accordingly to the system's use, and then produces an output. Manufacturing adds form value to a product, and a manufacturing system possesses both positive and negative feedback elements. Societal goals are the goals a business promotes that are not as a result of any technical, legal, or economical reason. System goals provide an idea of the future or desired result that a business envisions, plans, commits to achieve. And businesses endeavor to reach goals within a finite time by setting deadlines. There are 5 types of technology systems: communications, construction, manufacturing, resource, and transportation systems. The product life cycle begins with the initial product design and development and ends with the removal of the product from the market. The 5 stages of the life cycle: research and development, introduction, the growth, maturity, and decline, and then finished up with some extension strategies. Module 4.2, manufacturing strategy. Lead time and the various aspects of lead time and components of lead time. And then we've got the product process matrix and the product positioning strategies and process strategy. And then we'll talk about teaming up with the customers and manufacturing management as a strategy, and then finish off with production support functions and the learning outcomes in this module. The relationship between customer lead time and chosen product positioning strategy, volume variety matrix, products and services for each of the product positioning strategies, and then link the product positioning strategies with the appropriate process strategies. Importance of teaming up with suppliers and customers, internal and external, at each level in the supply chain. Principles of manufacturing management as a strategy. The conceptual framework in this module. Customer lead time is the time between when a customer places an order with a supply company and the time that order is delivered to the complete satisfaction of the customer. Customer lead time is influenced by the chosen product positioning strategy. Manufacturing lead time is the time between when an order is first released onto the shop floor and when the order is completed and moved into the finished goods store. The product process matrix is a graphical representation that matches a product positioning strategy with its corresponding process strategy. And manufacturing strategies can be subdivided into product positioning strategies and process positioning strategies. The product positioning strategies include engineer to order, make to order, assemble to order, and make to stock. The process strategies include flow shop manufacturing, job shop manufacturing, and fixed position manufacturing. Core to manufacturing success is teaming up with the customers, both internally and externally. And manufacturing as a strategy has 2 subcategories: formation strategies and implementation strategies. And then manufacturing is not able to operate efficiently in isolation of the other business functions. Module 4.3, type of production. We'll talk a little bit about early manufacturing and manufacturing as a system. We'll look at manufacturing inputs, processes, and outputs, and look at manufacturing management. We will continue with the 3 stages of manufacturing growth: the Industrial Revolution, types of production systems, intermediate production, and continuous production. The learning outcomes in this module. Manufacturing conversion process. The inputs and outputs of a manufacturing conversion process. The effect the Industrial Revolution had on modern manufacturing. Distinguish between desired outputs and undesired outputs, highlighting their effect on the environment. And then distinguish between the primary industries and the secondary industries, and then compare intermittent production with continuous production. Products produced with job, batch, and repetitive and process production. The conceptual framework in this module. Manufacturing systems are being developed to produce the goods needed required and the services that we require. The manufacturing system is used to change materials into a more usable form for use by people. Transformation technology, materials processing, creates form, value, and utility. Managerial technology encompasses the actions that ensure resources are effectively used to produce the goods or provide the services offered by the business. Manufacturing technology has three stages: extraction, fabrication, and assembly and packaging. And the three stages of manufacturing growth have come from the Stone Age and the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, and then through the Industrial Revolution. The development and use of steam power was undoubtedly the most significant technical achievement of the Industrial Revolution. And the production systems are defined by the volume variety matrix. The two primary types of production systems are intermittent and continuous. Intermittent production encompasses both job shops and batch production. Continuous production, which encompasses repetitive production and continuous production. Module 4.4, manufacturing processing and manufacturing material. Casting and molding processes, then we'll talk about forming processes, separation processes, conditioning processes, assembly, finishing processes, and then materials and manufacturing, engineering materials, and then finish up with composites. The learning outcomes in this module: manufacturing process families, and distinguish between organic materials and inorganic materials that we use in manufacturing, and the different classes of manufacturing materials, examples of each class of those manufacturing materials. The conceptual framework in this module: casting and molding, which is a manufacturing process in which a molten material is introduced into a solid mold and allowed to solidify. Forming processes, which are a series of processes that use force applied from a die or rolling to reshape the materials. Separating processes, which are manufacturing processes that use tools to shear or cut away unwanted material from an object, helping it to shape and size the product. Things like milling, shearing, and turning could fall into separating processes. Conditioning processes are processes developed to change the internal structure of the materials. And then assembly processes are manufacturing processes that put materials and parts together to form a finished product. Finishing processes are a set of manufacturing processes that add a protective coat to a product or modifies the surface of that product to both protect it and make it more appealing to the customer. There's two types of materials used in manufacturing: organic material and inorganic materials. Materials that do not have iron as their principal ingredients, we call these non-ferrous materials. Polymeric materials are organic substances that do not have a crystal structure. Ceramic materials are inorganic, non-metallic, solid materials comprising metal, non-metal, or metalloid atoms primarily held in ionic or covalent bonds. And lastly, composite materials are a combination of two or more materials, giving us some very interesting characteristics. Fifth module, manufacturing and operation support functions. Module 5.1 is about industrial engineering and productivity improvement. The role of industrial engineering and productivity improvements, and how we go about improving productivity. And then we'll talk about labor and equipment productivity. We'll look at some work study, we'll look at method study, and we'll look at work measurement, and then we'll look at compilation of time standards, and finish off with ergonomics. So the learning outcomes for this module are going to be the role of industrial engineering in a manufacturing environment, how the role of an industrial engineer differs from other classes of engineering disciplines, productivity, productive resources, and explain how productivity influences the wealth of a nation. Component parts of work study, the procedure for a work study investigation. The role of ergonomics in a manufacturing environment, three different types of ergonomics. The conceptual framework in this module. Industrial engineers provide the bridge between management goals and operational performance. Industrial engineers determine the most cost-effective ways to use the basic factors of production. Industrial engineers analyze and evaluate methods of production and point out ways to improve them. Productivity is defined as the effectiveness of productive effort, and productivity is the product of utilization and efficiency. Productive resources consist of human resources, land and buildings, materials, materials, and plant and equipment. The labor and equipment used to produce a given output is the labor time and the equipment time expended in labor hours and machine hours. Work study is the systematic study of an operation or process to ensure the best possible use of the human and material resources available. The prime aim is to increase productivity. Method study determines the best way to carry out a task. Work measurement determines the best time. Method study provides the analyst with a systematic way of developing human resource effectiveness. Work measurement is a systematic determination through the use of various techniques of the amount of useful physical and mental work in terms of work units in a specific task. And lastly, ergonomics is the study of designing equipment and devices that fit the human body, its movements, and its cognitive abilities. Module 5.2, Quality, Inspection, Metrology, and Maintenance. Total Quality Management, Quality Defined, Quality Assurance and Quality Control, Inspection and Inspection Technique, Metrology, Plant Maintenance, Total Productive Maintenance. So the learning outcomes from this module will be elements of the quality triangle. Comparison between the definitions of quality, the purpose and process of inspection, and the role of metrology in ensuring products conform to specification, types of plant maintenance, and the concept of total productive maintenance, how total productive maintenance enhances the productive resource. The conceptual framework in this module, total quality management being based on the principle that each employee is committed to maintaining high standards of artistry in each company operation. Introduction of total quality management requires a shift from a centralized to a decentralized approach to excellence throughout the organization. Quality is defined as fitness for purpose, conformance to specifications, and value for money. Quality assurance ensures a product or service is made in the right way. Quality control evaluates whether the result is satisfactory. And the primary aim of any inspection activity is to ensure that all products leaving the company's premises are fit for purpose, conform to the specification, and provide value to the customer. How much inspection can only be determined after there's been a complete evaluation of other inputs to product knowledge. Inspection can take place either online or at a location separate from the production line. Metrology is the science of measurement, and it covers both the theoretical and practical issues related to measurement. And the primary purpose of plant maintenance is to keep the assets in good working order, to minimize disruptions to operations and production downtime. And then total productive maintenance is a methodology designed to ensure each piece of equipment in a production process always performs its required task and its output rate is never disrupted. Module 5.3, Lean and Waste Management. The PDCA cycle, the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. We'll look at the principles of lean. We'll look at lean manufacturing and lean initiatives and lean and just in time. And then we'll start talking about waste and the categories of waste and the 8 types of waste that we might find in our operation. We call them muda from the Japanese. The learning outcomes in this module. The lean process, and explain how lean is used to increase the productive use of a company's resources. Distinguish between value-added activities and non-value-adding activities. And lean tool, how they can be used. The productivity improvement techniques and categories of waste, and identify the types of waste. The 7 basic quality tools. Distinguish between quality tools, quality techniques, and how the two complement each other. Continuous improvement technique. The conceptual framework in this module. Lean production consists of a set of principles used to achieve improvements in productivity, quality, and lead time, accomplished by eliminating all forms of production waste through Kaizen. Lean thinking is simply the generic version of the Toyota production system with the aim of eliminating waste in any form. Lean involves a never-ending process of problem identification and resolution to increase the value of goods and services in the eyes of the customer. Lean manufacturing has become the standard for companies that want to survive in an increasingly competitive global economy. And lean initiatives focus on the reduction of the 7 wastes to improve overall quality, eliminating bottlenecks and reducing costs. Progressive lean companies organize their employees by forming teams and then giving these teams the responsibility and training training to carry out a number of specific tasks. Waste is anything that doesn't add value to a product, service, or process in the eyes of the customer. Waste can be categorized and controlled. Waste, directive waste, and special waste. Controlled waste comprises commercial waste, household waste, and industrial waste. And there are 8 types of waste: overproduction, motion, inventory, waiting time, transportation time, extra processing waste, defective waste, and the last one there, the underutilized people waste. Waste elimination is one of the most effective ways to increase the profitability of any business. Module 5.4, continuous improvement, and this is the last module, productivity improvement technique. We'll talk about continuous improvement, and then we're going to go through the 7 basic quality tools and then complete with continuous improvement techniques. So looking at the learning outcomes, continuous improvement initiative, productivity improvement techniques, the 7 basic quality tools, and distinguish between quality tools and quality techniques, and explain that the two complement each other. And then last, continuous improvement techniques, and giving the conceptual framework in this module. Productivity being a ratio between the goods and services produced and the resources employed in producing those goods and services. There are a number of productivity improvement techniques available to the analyst in carrying out a continuous improvement initiative. Continuous improvement is a systematic, ongoing effort to eliminate all forms of waste from a process. And the lack of focus is one of the biggest obstacles to the effective implementation of any continuous improvement initiative. A culture of continuous improvement means a company is responsive to change from a variety of input and can continually develop quality goods and services that are of value to the customer. Kaizen is a means of continuous improvement by systematically making small, beneficial changes on a continuous basis. It's a never-ending journey. Continuous improvement process aims at doing things better, not fighting fires. Its goal is not to find somebody to blame when things go wrong. It's simply a way of looking at things differently and recognizing that things can be done better. The 7 basic tools are essentially graphical techniques used to identify and fix issues related to product or process quality. Techniques are used to investigate a process. Tools are used to record and analyze the findings of an investigation. It's a range of well-established quality continuous improvement techniques that are available for investigating process deficiencies.